Now, this morning, the title is called Caring for Others. And it's the 17th reading from the Torah, and it's named Yitro, or Jethro, and it's the actual Hebrew name for Jethro, like in the Beverly Hillbillies, Jethro, okay? The title comes from the first words of the first verse of the reading, which says, "Now Jethro," or Yitro, "the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people." Now, the portion tells the story of Jethro's visit to the camp of Israel, then relates the great theophany at Mount Sinai. Theophany is a sight of God, okay? It's where God comes down and gives us a vision of himself. And where God gave us the Ten Commandments and invited the people to enter a special covenant relationship with him. Now, last week, it's like last week. I showed you we picked up the Torah scroll and turned it around here, and it wobbled and stuff, so you couldn't read it. So this week I decided, okay, we're going to just do it this way. And this is what the Ten Commandments looks like on our own Torah scroll, okay? It matches just about exactly what our own Torah scroll looked like there for the Ten Commandments. Now, we've all heard the words of the Ten Commandments in English. Now, but do you know how it sounds in Hebrew? Okay? Well, it says, "I am Adonai your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." Now, for all of you native Hebrew speakers out there, I apologize in advance for my West Texas accent in speaking Hebrew, okay? So, "Anoki Adonai Elohecha asher hotzetika me'eretz Mitzrayim mibet avadim." That's the first one. Second one, "You shall have no other gods before me. Lo yeh lecha Elohim akerim al panei." Third one, "You must not take the name of Adonai your God in vain. Lo titza et shem Adonai Elohecha lashav." At number 4, "Remember Yom Shabbat to keep it holy. Sakor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho." Number 5, "Honor your father and mother. Kabed et avika ve'et emeka." Number 6, "Do not murder. Lo tirtzak." Number 7, "Do not commit adultery. Lo tin'af." Number 8, "Do not steal. Lo tignov." Number 9, "Do not bear false witness against your neighbor. Lo ta'aneh veraka et shaker." And finally, number 10, "Lo takmod," "Do not covet." Now, that's our Hebrew lesson for this morning. I hope it did okay back there, Sue. I mean, the teacher, when the teacher is in the room, oh boy. So now she can tell you, she can set you straight after the service as to all of my boo-boos, okay? But anyway, that's what the Ten Commandments sounds like in Hebrew. And as we stated previously, this week's Torah portion, Yitro, begins with the story of Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher Moses, and his father-in-law Yitro, a Midianite priest of all things. Moses greets his father-in-law with a low bow and kisses, and it's a sign of great respect, and it's if you ever watch any of these Israeli movies, where they greet each other, they do the mwah, mwah, mwah kind of a thing, and so that's common in lots of different countries. So the next day, after Yitro arrives, and they had probably a nice little feast of manna and whatever, Moses sat as a magistrate among all the people all day long. I mean, the line went all the way up. It was a long line. By nightfall, Yitro counsels himself, you can't do this alone. The task of leadership is too heavy for you. Instead, Yitro advises him to establish a system of judges who can share the burden. And Moses does exactly as his father-in-law suggests. Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, by all accounts, was not a follower of the one true God. He was impressed by all the miracles and exploits of God's people, but he was not yet at this time a believer. Now, so how could he give advice to Moses and then expect Moses to take that advice when he wasn't even a believer? Because God will use people for his purposes if they will just listen. And if we will just listen. Jethro gave advice to Moses, and that it is just, as wise and pertinent today as it was 3,500 years ago. You can't do it all by yourself. Sometimes we need help from others. We always need to rely on God, always. And as you will see shortly, there are also people that need us. They need to rely on us sometimes. Immediately after the story of Jethro and his wise counsel comes the passage we read in our Torah portion today, which tells how on the third new moon after the Israelites went forth from Egypt, they enter the wilderness of Sinai, if you're from Texas. In that wilderness, they prepare themselves for a revelation. God gave the Israelites kind of a hint. In Hebrew, it's a remez, a hint of his plan for them in verses 5 and 6. And then in chapter 20, God gave them the 10 Commandments. Tradition says not only to those who were there that day, but to all of us throughout time. The 10 Commandments were meant to be eternal. And by the way, they are commandments, they're not suggestions. Now, if any of you have looked online this morning and seen the post that I put out yesterday for Shabbat Shalom, there is some individual that came on there and said that we should not be worshiping on the Shabbat because we should be worshiping on the first day of the week because that's when Jesus arose. All right? And then he also said, and when Jesus came, he did away with all of the Old Testament and the 10 Commandments. Well, I am going to enter into a discussion with the person, and because someone has been giving him wrong information. And the 10 Commandments are eternal. Yeshua said in Matthew, okay, and for following back there, I'm sorry, Lori, I'm on a rabbi trail here. In Matthew 5:17, what does it say? It says, I did not come into the world to condemn the law and to do away with it, abrogate it. He said, no, I came to fulfill the law. And so that means that he didn't do away with it. There are people that say because of the law of Christ, the law of Moses is dead and of no effect. That could not be more incorrect, okay? Because the Bible says that the Torah is going to stick with us until heaven and earth pass away. And it hadn't passed away yet, okay? Not to my knowledge. And I mean, the rest of the world, I don't know. Texas is still here. But anyway, let's get back to my notes. But before the commandments, before that mystical Sinai moment, God said to them, Now then, if you listen closely to my voice and keep my covenant, then you will be my own treasure from among all people. Wow, that's neat. For all the earth is mine. And as for you, you will be to me a kingdom of kohanim. Kohanim is priests. You'll be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. The earth and all its inhabitants are God's, but Torah says that we are something special. And I've, maybe sometimes someone has told you, said, well, aren't you special? That's not what God meant. He said, yeah, you are special to me. If we live in covenant with God, then we are God's segulah, his precious possession or treasure. We are mamlechet kohanim vegoy kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, what can we make of this, and how does this relate to us, this story of Yitro or Yitro, and how does that relate to us? As many of you know that I do not like to teach things just for the sake of teaching it. I like to have a practical application of it so that, I can do better. Rabbi Abraham Yitzhak Kook, the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of what would become the nation or the state of Israel, he interpreted these verses to mean that our community has two communal missions. Now, remember what I said about Yitro not being a believer, even in the one true God, and yet God put in his mind, in his voice, good advice for Moses. Well, here's Rabbi Kook, and as far as I know, he was not a believer in Yeshua, but he was a godly man. He believed in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He said that the phrase mamlechet kohanim, a nation of priests, refers to the aspiration to lift up or uplift the entire world. It's our job, says Rav Kook, to act in a way which will help all the peoples of the world to fulfill their purpose and to live out their highest selves. That's pretty lofty, isn't it? Of course, in his paradigm, that meant that it's our job to teach the world God's ways, to ensure that everyone cares for the widow and the orphan, shows compassion to the stranger, acts justly and righteously as Torah describes. 2,000 years earlier, another Jewish guy expounded on the concept of being a nation of priests. He said that we are to be the light to the world. You find that in Matthew 5:14. And in both the books of Matthew and Mark, we see that Yeshua's parting instructions to his disciples were to make disciples of all men of every tribe and nation. That's our job. Mark 16:15 said, he told them, go into all the world, and proclaim the good news to every creature. And then in Matthew 28:19, he says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, immersing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and remember, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Now, in addition, Torah also tells us that we're meant to be a goy kadosh, a holy nation. Rav Kook interprets this as the flip side of the coin. On the one hand, we're meant to teach the whole world how to be righteous. And on the other hand, we're meant to focus inwardly to live out our own holiness in our own lives. Being a holy people means tending to our own spiritual growth. Rav Shaul, the Apostle Paul, gave a similar advice to the Kehillah, the church in Philippi. In Philippians 2:12, he says, "Therefore, my loved ones, just as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now even more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling." Being holy does not mean being sinless or ever making a mistake. You know, you've heard me say that many times. And it certainly doesn't mean parading around with a superior attitude, looking down your nose at other people. That's not what being holy is. No, being holy means setting yourself apart from the things of the world and focusing on the things of God. That's why God told us to be holy, because He is holy. He's not going to tell you to do something. He's not going to demand something of you that is impossible. If He tells you to do it, it can be done. Living a holy life is not a cakewalk, though. It requires work and discipline. Yitro was a Midianite priest, an outsider to the Israelite community, but when he shares his wisdom and his management insights with Moses, Moses took them to heart. Given the Torah's generally negative stance toward other nations of the ancient Near East, I've always found it remarkable that Yitro is so obviously respected and trusted despite being a foreign priest. But there's a connection between the Yitro story and this verse, which asserts that we are God's treasure, a nation of priests and holy. Torah reminds us that all of the earth is God's, but he asserts that our community has a special role. We do. We're supposed to be a light. In Rav Kook's interpretation, our community's task is both outward-facing and inward-facing. It's our job to help everyone in the world to live up to their best potential and their most righteous self. Do you ever think about that? You've got a task that you need to be able to get out in front of and with people, your neighbors, your friends, your family, and help them be the best that they can be. Okay, and that doesn't mean enlist in the army. All right, they stole that slogan: "Be the best you can be." If you're really, okay, now I can tell a story here. How does the average person get into the U.S. Coast Guard?
Accident?
An average person will never make it into the United States Coast Guard. Okay. For those of you that don't know, I spent 26 years in there. Okay. So, oh, by accident. Yeah, some of us are. Okay. No, some of us know how to swim. So we don't drown. There you go. But I shouldn't have started it. I just shouldn't have started it. All right. As a nation of priests, we're obligated to tend to the entire world. As a holy nation, we're obligated to tend to our own selves. The Torah balances between these two callings within the same verse. If we only tend to ourselves, we're falling down on our job of caring for all creation. But if we don't tend to our own selves, we can't heal the world either. It's got to be a balance. This is, I think, part of what Yitro taught Moses when he urged him to find righteous men who could serve as magistrates. If Moses tried to adjudicate every single disagreement and dispute in the entire community, he would burn out. You can't do it all on your own. You can't go out and solve all the world's problems, okay? You see something, you will just burn out. But once he appointed judges, he was able to tend to his own spiritual needs, which in turn allowed him then to continue tending to the community. Now, Yitro was an outsider, not part of our covenant with God, and yet he still clearly has spiritual wisdom. Not only that, it's spiritual wisdom that Moses really needed at the time. And we too may find that valuable spiritual wisdom comes to us sometimes from outside our own gates. Our task is to integrate that wisdom from outside with our spiritual tradition and our spiritual path. I have been criticized, and so we do that so that we can truly be a mamlechet kohanim and a goy kadosh. I've been criticized in the past for using references outside the Bible and outside of even traditional Judaism. Because they said, if you've got the Bible, there's nothing else that you need to make your point. And I can say, okay, the Bible is foundational, but God gives people wisdom. I mean, look at all of the good things that a guy like C.S. Lewis has written. There's all sorts of good stuff out there. And things that are not even, say, religious or spiritual in nature. Aldous Huxley is another one that gives a lot of wisdom. And I was roundly criticized recently for quoting Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, known as the Rebbe, because he was not a believer in Yeshua. His disciples, his people, consider him a Mashiach, the Messiah, and yet he died. But he was a very godly man and a very wise man. He had lots of good things to say, especially when it came to dealing with other people and leadership potential and leadership qualities. And so you take wisdom and you take instruction where it comes to you, because you can look at it and you don't have to take every bit of advice that somebody runs your way, but don't throw it away just because you said, well, you don't belong to Tree of Life Messianic Congregation, so why should I listen to you? And so this is a lesson for us. What does this mean to you as being a nation of priests? It was a priest's job in those days to connect the people with God, okay? And so how can we live out that responsibility now? Are we connecting people with God? When we see a person in need, do we try to help that person? Yeshua had this to say about it. Said, Amen, I tell you, whatever you did to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. That's in Matthew. And in Mark, he said, for whoever gives you a cup of water to drink in my name because you belong to Messiah, amen, I tell you, he will never lose his reward. Now, every week we recite the second greatest commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. Right at the end of the Ve'ahavta l'recha kamoka. And it doesn't require great wealth or intellect or political position. If it did, none of us would be able to fulfill that commandment. because I don't know of anybody in here that is independently wealthy. I myself am pretty much independent of all wealth. But, any of you resemble that remark? Okay. And certainly, I don't have any political clout anywhere. Now, I'm not going to claim being a dummy, all right? So we'll just leave that intellect thing. God gives us a good intellect. So it only takes putting others ahead of you, like spending time with a shut-in. I know the people right now in this congregation that they go in and they sit with people. They help people. When they learn of a situation, they go in and take care of business. Listening to someone that's just troubled, that's part of what you can do. Just listen. I don't have a degree in psychology. I don't have a PhD in all of that stuff, counseling and things. But I sure do a lot of listening to people. Picking someone up on Saturday and bringing them to the synagogue. That's what you can do. There are thousands of ways to be the priest and the servant that God calls us to be. Now, what does it mean to you how about the holy nation? Can you imagine what it means to be a holy nation? Well, not the holy nation, but not only, let's say it this way, not the holy nation, not the only holy nation, but a community which is collectively holy. Now, as Rav Kook says, this means that we are a nation which tends to its own spiritual sustenance, then how might we live that out in our own day? We all need to look after the spiritual and physical needs of our community. Pray daily for our members. And it doesn't have to be a big, elaborate prayer. You don't have to, get down on your knees and cry before the Lord. Paul said you live in an attitude of prayer all day long. He said, I just pray without ceasing. You live your life in a prayer. David said, I am a prayer. Remember from last week I said that, or the week before? What David said, I am a prayer. And that's how our lives should be, that we are constantly interceding for people or thinking about good ways to help people. Actively seek out ways to be a blessing. And in that way, we can be a nation or a community of priests and a holy people. Now, I can't believe it, but I actually finished before the bells of St. Peter's rang, okay? I wanted to leave that thought with you about helping others. That's how we actually fulfill what God has wanted us to do, is to go out and help people. I put that in our Friday morning and our Sunday morning post that I put out there sometimes about helping someone else and not just being totally inwardly focused. That's one of the things that people that don't grow, they're of the attitude of us for and no more. I've seen people in their families where they would come here and show up for a while, and they'll say, well, we don't really need a congregation. I got my wife and 2 kids, and that's all we need. We don't need anyone else. And they couldn't be more wrong. Everyone needs someone outside of their own group. And that someone could be you. Think about it. There's somebody out there that's hurting, and God says, okay, you know what? I want Janet to go help her. I want Mary to go help her. I want Billy Bob to go out there and help that guy that's hurting. And so you just never know where it is and who the person may be. So I would encourage each one of you to tune up your spiritual ears so that when the opportunity arrives, that you are there and ready to help and fulfill your purpose in life